Okie dokie, so let's get right into taking a look at Buddha's life. I hate to break it to you, but he was a prince. He had a lot of financial privilege and he spent his entire life inside castle walls. And he found enlightenment because he was bored. I guess let that be a lesson to you that you can take any energy in life and use it to your advantage. The Buddha was born in Nepal. We know that for sure. We also know that his name wasn't the Buddha. His actual name was Siddhartha Gautama. The further back in time you go, the more hazy exact dates become on certain things, and people disagree. The year of his birth is kind of agreed upon to be in the specific era of time called the Mahajanapada era during the reign of Bimbisara. He was born in a place called Lumbini in Nepal. Here's a really cool place in Lumbini that I love. In the early 1900s, most historians agreed on Buddha being alive around 563 BCE to 483 BCE, but the tradition of Eastern Buddhists is that he died in the year 949 BCE. In the Kalachakra tradition, he died around 833 BCE. And in the 80s, some folks proposed that he died around 400 or 411. So, he was born in Nepal approximately 2,500 years ago. A seer known as a Sita prophesies his birth and says that he will either be a great ruler or a holy leader of some sort and renounce all of his worldly possessions. This essentially scares the crap out of his dad, so his dad locks him up in the castle for his entire life, trying to shield him from any sort of suffering. Most texts and scholars agree that his mother, Queen Maya of Sakya, died 7 days after his birth. Buddha was then cared for by his aunt for the remainder of his life. More on her later. According to the book Humanistic Buddhism, at age 8, Buddha learns the 5 Vedas and 5 sciences. His father also summons 500 children from the Sakya clan to study as his classmates. From ages 12 to 18, Siddhartha gets trained in martial arts. Naturally, he excels at this. He is the Buddha after all. During this time, he's different than his peers. He often ponders topics like, why do the weak fall prey to the strong? And what causes life's suffering? During this period, at age 16, the Buddha also gets married to Princess Yasodhara. Now we get into a pretty popular Buddhist tale called the Four Sights. And this is the reason why Buddha ends up leaving home. It is found in a body of work all about Buddha's incarnations called the Jataka Tales. This is Jataka 75. To frame this story, you have to understand that the Buddha lived inside castle walls his entire life, and he never saw an old person or a sick person. The first thing he sees is an old man, and he comes to the understanding that one day we will all age. Then he sees a sick and injured man in the road, and he comes to the realization that we all get sick and suffer in our life. He then sees a funeral procession, and he's confused as to why they aren't waking up the sleeping guy. His friend is like, buddy, that guy's not asleep, he's dead. So then, of course, Buddha realizes that one day we will all die. Buddha is shaken by this a bit, but the final thing that he sees is a holy man who seems to be very much at peace. Buddha comes to the realization that even though the world is full of suffering, we too can attain inner peace. Buddha and his wife have one son named Rahula 6 years after they get married. The Buddha actually conceives a child on the day of his great renunciation, though some texts say that his son was born on the day of his great renunciation. The great renunciation is when Buddha chops his hair off, gives up his horse and jewelry, and goes and does his Buddha thing. Side note, Buddha's wife is pregnant for 6 years in some versions of these stories, and it has to do with her bad karma and his son's bad karma from a previous life. Also, his son's name is translated as fetter, which literally means shackles. His name Rahula is seen as meaning literally a blockage to the path to enlightenment, which is nice. He later ends up becoming the very first Buddhist monk and he is honored in many Buddhist traditions afterwards, so it didn't end up being all that bad. So Buddha crosses the river, chops all his hair off, and wanders off to this place called Rajagaha to beg for alms in the street. A king hears this and offers Buddha a share of his kingdom because he is so impressed. Buddha declines the offer of King Bimbisara, But he tells him that later, when he becomes enlightened, King Bimbisara will be the very first person that he comes to visit to share the enlightenment with. Buddha then makes his way through life and comes across his first teacher, Alara Kalama. He's this hermit philosopher who's an expert on meditating, and after studying meditation with Alara for a while, this is what Wikipedia has to say. Gautama eventually equaled Alara, who could not teach him more, saying, "You are the same as I am now. There is no difference between us. Stay here and take my place and teach my students with me." Gautama was not interested in staying. After leaving, the Buddha found a new teacher, Udaka Ramaputta. Buddha went and studied with this guy Udaka about things called immaterial attachments or formless realms. Just like Buddha's last teacher, once Buddha surpassed his teacher's knowledge, Udaka was like, "Hey, why don't you teach my students?" Buddha politely declined and then later criticized Udaka for teaching principles that he himself had not yet mastered. After this period of learning, Buddha goes and studies asceticism in the forest with 5 of his closest friends. He does this practice for 6 years, and some traditions say that he only ate 1 sesame seed or grain of wheat every day. Because he becomes so skinny and close to death, Buddha realizes that severe avoidance is not the perfect practice. So he leaves his 5 friends and wanders into a village. A woman named Sujata offers him milk and honey, and he goes to take a bath in the Naranjana River. Then comes a shining moment for him as he sits under the Bodhi tree for 6 days. And he realizes that what he was seeking was inside of him all along, and that he has nothing else to attain. He is quoted as saying, "Wonder of wonders, this very enlightenment is the nature of all beings, and yet they are unhappy for lack of it." So at the age of 35, he becomes the Buddha. Buddha's 5 buddies got mad at him, and they say that they're never gonna talk to him again. Even though they were mad, Buddha was so awesome and radiant that they couldn't help but listen to him when he spoke. So in Deer Park, he turns the wheel of the Dharma for the first time, which is another way of referencing the teachings of the Buddha. Buddha's 5 buddies later end up making the heart of the Sangha, which means community. They travel all over teaching these principles to laymen and monks, and that suffering is universal and impermanent. For 12 years, Buddha travels across India teaching. He mostly teaches the 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, 12 links of dependent origination, the 37 conditions leading to Bodhi, and non-self in general. Buddha ordains Yasa and his relatives and friends, 55 people in total. Then Yasa's parents follow suit. These guys, with his 5 friends, become the first Sangha. The Sangha is a very important facet of his later teachings called the Triple Gem. Buddha then travels and teaches the Dharma to King Bimbisara. Buddha's word starts to become more widespread with kings and scholars. So people start donating monasteries for the monks and groves of trees for meditation and all sorts of things that will help the cause. Then we break into a period of teaching called Vaipulya by Chinese Buddhist scholars, and many of his teachings are expanded upon greatly here. In Buddha's 40s, a few things happen. Buddha's son Rahula is ordained, and Buddha establishes the 10 precepts for Samaneras, also known as novice male monks. His father dies at the age of 93, and his brother becomes the ruler of his homeland. The Buddha's aunt who raised him leads 500 court ladies into Buddhism and become the first ever bhikshuni, or Buddhist nuns. For 22 years, Buddha starts teaching the topics of prajna and the middle path and starts to point his followers to the true essence of the Dharma. This becomes the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. Now, King Bimbisara's son makes friends with Buddha's brother-in-law, Devadatta. Devadatta is not a nice guy, and he starts teaching poor old King Bimbisara's son things that are not nice. Devadatta is a mystic and a psychic, and he thinks that people should be paying more attention to him and giving him more clout. So he tries to split up the Sangha. Poor King Bimbisara gets imprisoned by his son, Ajatasattu, and the prince declares the kingdom to be his. During this era, the Buddha teaches this sutra that I can't pronounce, which is also known as the Sutra of the Meditation on the Buddha of Immeasurable Life. He teaches this to King Bimbisara and his wife, and poor King Bimbisara dies in prison. Meanwhile, Buddha's evil brother-in-law is trying to split up the Sangha, and Buddha stops him. The now king, Ajatasattu, repents and takes refuge in the teachings of Buddhism. And I'm sure he felt super bad that his dad died in prison. Oops. Everyone be quiet. So a bunch of wars happen over the throne like they do, and Buddha expands on his teachings of the Lotus Sutra. He's in his 70s during this period. The king is in a bit of a hard spot right now, and he wants to start a war against one of his rivals. The king sends his minister, Vasakara, to get some advice from the Buddha. And the Buddha teaches him the 7 non-regressing dharmas. Because of this teaching, the king doesn't start a war. Before the Buddha's death, he says to his disciples, "Do not grieve. Everything with life in this universe is impermanent. If you wish that I permanently stay in this world, yet do not act in accordance with the Dharma I have taught, what would be the use of living for millions of years anyway? If you all act in accordance with the Dharma I have taught, I will live forever in your hearts. My body will pervade the universe, and I will be together with all of you, and with all sentient beings in the future." The final 4 questions asked of the Buddha were by his disciple Ananda, and he was known as having the best memory of all of his disciples. How shall we start the beginning of the sutras? After you enter nirvana, who shall be our teacher? Where should we abide? How should we deal with vicious monks? The Buddha answers, you should begin each sutra with, "Thus I have heard." You should rely upon the precepts as your teacher. You should abide in the 4 bases of mindfulness. You should quietly disregard viciousness. My favorite version of Buddha's death story is this one, again quoted from the book Humanistic Buddhism. The Buddha chose to enter nirvana peacefully in meditation on the 8 vases of overcoming and 8 kinds of liberation between 2 solid trees in Kusingara. This has been such a fun journey, researching this and learning all the little details about the Buddha's life. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you all have a great day full of love and light. Until next time, Positive signing off.